Welcome to FolkFear, where stories are not told but unearthed. Buried in the soil of forgotten villages, carried in the wind that whispers through broken shrines, etched into rusted relics that should never have been touched. Tonight, you will not hear a tale made by hands. You will hear the memory of something older, a sorrow nailed into wood, a chant silenced by betrayal, a monk whose curse was never buried deep enough. This is not just a story. This is a wound that still bleeds under the floorboards of faith. So sit with me as the candle flickers and listen closely to the nail that remembers. The train groaned like an old man with secrets as it pulled into the station. A hiss of steam, the rattle of wheels on rusted rails, and then silence, broken only by the hollow thud of Tien's boots on the wooden platform. No one was there to greet him. He hadn't expected anyone, not really. The village of Ban Shryu was a place most people left and never spoke of again. A blink on an old map, a whisper lost in the mountains. But Tien was not like most people. He was the last blood of a monk who had died in silence and whose grave had never truly settled. Tien adjusted the strap of his backpack and looked out over the valley. Mist hung low like mourning veils across the trees. The roofs of the village curved beneath moss in silence, their old wooden eaves sagging like the backs of kneeling monks. He took a breath. The air smelled of wet incense and iron. He walked. Each step down the winding path toward the temple was accompanied by an odd creak beneath the soil, as if the land remembered the footsteps of someone else, someone it had not forgiven. The temple stood like a forgotten prayer, crumbling, weathered, but stubbornly present. Its gate bore no name, only rusted hinges and faded carvings of lotus petals, blackened by time. Ivy clawed up its sides like veins across a corpse, and at the center of the courtyard, half swallowed by the earth, stood the old burial reliquary, a square of stone surrounded by prayer flags that hadn't danced in decades. Tien stopped at its edge. He kneeled, out of reverence, out of instinct. His great-granduncle Tien Bao had once chanted here, a revered monk famed for his devotion and feared for his silence. The family never spoke much of him, only in cautious riddles. He prayed too hard. He saw too much. He gave up his mouth for peace. But no one explained what that meant. Tien opened his notebook and stared at the old floor plan he'd drawn from library records. He had come to restore the temple, not out of piety, but promise. His mother's final wish: return to the mountain. Let the past rest. He had not known what that meant until now, because the past was breathing. That night, he made camp inside the prayer hall. No electricity, no cell signal, only candlelight and wind. The wind was strange here. It circled instead of swept, as if unwilling to pass through. It gathered in corners and whispered against wooden beams. And somewhere, far beneath the temple floor, Tien thought he heard something creak. Not wood, not stone, something softer, something wet. He shook off the thought and unpacked his sleeping mat. The shrine at the front of the hall still held the old bronze Buddha, tarnished and blind. Offerings from years past, petrified fruit, dried rice, melted wax, lay before it like a timeline of forgotten devotions. Tien lit a single stick of incense and bowed. As he rose, the wind stopped. The silence was so sudden it throbbed, and in that silence,
A single sound, a click, a faint metallic groan, as if something beneath the temple had moved, as if the earth had shifted, not from pressure, but awareness. Tien turned. No one was there, but the incense smoke curled in a perfect spiral, downward, toward the buried reliquary. By morning, the villagers had heard. Tien didn't know how, he hadn't told anyone, but they came slowly, peering around walls, whispering behind fans and doors. Old men, faces cracked like dried bark, women with eyes like polished stone, children who didn't smile. At noon, one of them approached, an elder, bent nearly in half, leaning on a cane carved with prayer symbols. "You are his blood, the monk who sealed the earth," the old man rasped. Tien nodded. "I came to restore what's been forgotten." The elder shook his head. "Nothing is forgotten. It only waits to be remembered, and some things must not be." Tien blinked. The man gestured to the buried reliquary. "He is still angry." Tien spent the next few days clearing brush, scrubbing the courtyard, and repainting the cracked walls of the shrine. He didn't disturb the reliquary, not yet, but every time he passed it, he felt watched, not from above, from below. He began to dream of chanting, low droning syllables in a language his mind didn't know, but his bones did. In the dreams, he stood in the center of the temple, alone, as voices rose from the floor like mist. Sometimes he felt a nail press against his chest, lightly at first, then harder, as if begging entry. On the fifth night, the dreams changed. He stood in front of a door, no, a lid, and behind it someone was screaming, not loudly, just enough to never be ignored. He couldn't sleep. He lit a candle and walked outside. Moonlight bled through the mist. The reliquary shimmered with dew. He approached it slowly, the way one approaches a sleeping animal, cautiously, respectfully, and with a sense that it might suddenly awake. Kneeling beside it, he brushed away the moss. A single inscription was carved in the stone, one he hadn't noticed before. "Forgive my tongue, forgive my voice, forgive my silence." Tien shivered. Then he saw it. At the far corner of the reliquary, half hidden beneath a broken prayer stone, was a wooden box, rotting at the edges, its surface blackened with time and soot. And at its center, driven through both lid and relic, stood a rusted iron nail. The nail was etched, symbols too faded to read, but they curled like vines, like curses, like memory. Tien reached out. The wind rose. The candle flickered. And beneath his fingers, the nail felt warm, as if it had just been hammered. He did not open it, not that night, but he carried the box inside and placed it before the Buddha. And as the final glow of the candle died, Tien heard one last sound echo through the walls of the temple. Not wind, not voice, but the unmistakable sound of something moving beneath the soil. A whisper that wasn't words, only the memory of pain and metal and silence. Tien didn't sleep. The box sat on the altar, silent but loud in his thoughts. Every creak of the wood felt deliberate. Every gust of wind that slipped through the cracked temple walls seemed to carry a chant, low, drawn-out syllables that curled like smoke and made no sense in the waking world, yet somehow felt remembered. He approached it again at dawn. The sky outside had turned the color of bruised bone, half light, half mist, And in that moment, before the sun broke through the fog, Tien knelt before the sealed box once more, the rusted nail gleaming with dew. It hasn't looked like that last night. It was subtle, but it shimmered. Not golden, but wet. Not light, but something darker that reflected light in ways it shouldn't, like oil or blood. He stared at the nail, noting the odd symbols etched along its shaft. Spirals, lines crossing through circles, a shape like a mouth sewn shut, another like an eye split in half. These were not decorations, they were bindings. Tien's training as an archivist kicked in. He fetched his leather journal and began sketching the nail, carefully replicating the symbols in sequence. He tried not to touch it again. The warmth from before, it wasn't just physical. It lingered like grief that didn't belong to him. He flipped through his books. Nothing matched exactly. But one thing came close. A passage in an old manuscript referencing a counter-nail used in some remote monastic sects. It was not for affixing structures, but silence. Not literal, but spiritual. It was driven into items, places, or even people to contain what should not be spoken again. Tien's throat tightened. He looked at the nail. And then something shifted. The candle near the altar flickered. The incense, unlit, began to curl smoke from its tip, and a deep creak, not from the walls, not from the beams, but from the ground beneath him, sighed upward like a breath exhaled from the earth. He snapped the book shut. His eyes fell to the inscription carved into the wood just beneath the nail. A simple sentence burned into the box. Do not remove, not even in mercy. He didn't open it, but that didn't stop what had begun. Over the next 3 days, Tien found himself visited by villagers more frequently. They didn't ask questions, they only looked. Some stared at the box and bowed. Some spat quietly on the ground near it. One old woman, blind in one eye and carrying a basket of dried herbs, muttered a prayer he couldn't understand and pressed a coin to his palm. "It remembers," she whispered. "The rust is awake." Tien didn't reply. She shuffled away, leaving the smell of sandalwood and grief behind her. That night, the dreams changed again. In the dream, Tien stood within the reliquary, not beside it. The earth above was gone, the sky replaced by endless beams of temple wood charred black. The box was open, empty. Only the nail remained, floating upright, humming like a low bell. And around it, a circle of monks knelt, headless, silent, their robes soaked with something dark that steamed in the cold. In the center knelt one more figure, back turned, shoulders trembling, his spine arched as though something were holding it straight. And then the figure turned, but had no face, just a mouth, sewn shut with iron wire. Tien woke choking on something metallic. He coughed, and into his palm came a flake of rust. He stared at it in the morning light, disbelieving. It hadn't come from his clothes, or the temple beams, or the old tools. It was fresh, jagged, flaked cleanly like something pulled loose from old flesh, and his lips tasted of blood. Driven by unease, he returned to the reliquary pit outside. It was time to inspect it properly. With a pickaxe and the brush, he cleared away more of the moss and dirt. The stone was older than the temple itself, layered in sediment like something unearthed from beneath layers of time. Around its edges he found grooves, not decorative, not symbolic, teeth marks, like something had tried to claw out from within. At the base of the reliquary, he found a rusted latch. He hesitated, but something deeper, not curiosity, but almost duty, compelled him. He pried it open.
Inside was darkness. Thick, heavy. It didn't feel like air. It felt like forgetting. A pocket of time that hadn't moved forward with the rest of the world. He leaned in and shone his flashlight down. At the very bottom was another box. Larger, chained shut. A faint, cracked inscription glowed faintly beneath the dust. Here lies the voice that should not echo. Tien's fingers trembled, and then, behind him, a sound. Not a voice, but a single clack, like a nail falling. He turned. The box from the altar, the one he had found before, now lay open, and the rusted nail was gone. He didn't remember unlocking it. He didn't remember moving it, but the nail was no longer in the box. Instead, he heard a sound, low, rhythmic, tap, tap, tap. He turned his eyes to the altar wall, and there it was, the nail embedded perfectly into the old prayer beam, driven flush into the wood, and beneath it, a dark smear, not blood, not paint, but rust, fresh, wet, and slowly dripping. Tien backed away. The room grew colder. The incense began to burn on its own. No flame, no match, just thick black smoke rising upward like mourning wails. And from deep inside the temple, behind the altar, from the reliquary pit that hadn't echoed in decades, came a sound. 3 knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Soft, polite, but impossibly heavy, as though something buried had remembered his name.
The morning after the knocking, Tien walked to the village, not to seek help, but answers. The villagers had already gathered at the market square, faces turned toward him like sunflowers to stormlight. No one spoke, but the silence said everything. He had woken something that should have stayed buried. The elder, the same man who'd warned him before, approached again. His eyes were milky, yet sharp, the kind that had seen too much to doubt the unseen. "You found the nail," the elder said flatly. Tien hesitated. It moved." "It doesn't move," the elder rasped. "It remembers." Tien followed him to the communal hall, a small structure smelling of incense and smoke. On the walls hung faded scrolls, torn from water and time. The elder gestured for Tien to sit. Then slowly he began to speak. "Long before your time, this was a temple of great devotion. We called it the Monastery of the Weeping Hills. The monks here were not like others. They practiced the silent path, a way of purifying speech to remove lies and ego. Their leader was Tien Bao." The elder's voice lowered, reverent yet strained. "He was said to have been born mute, yet his prayers could calm storms. He could chant without sound, they said, and the spirits heard him anyway." Tien leaned forward. "What happened to him?" The elder dimmed. "He was betrayed." The story unfolded like a ritual itself, each word measured, each pause a prayer. When famine struck the valley a century ago, the villagers begged Tien Bao for mercy. He prayed for rain, and the rain came, but not for free. A drought spirit demanded 7 offerings of life, and the disciples feared. They loved him, but not enough. They locked him beneath the temple, sealing him inside the reliquary with chains, scripture, and a single iron nail through his tongue, believing that silencing him would silence the curse. The rain stopped anyway, and when the famine took the 7 disciples one by one, people realized too late
The curse had never been in his chant. It was in their betrayal. Tien's chest tightened. "You said he was sealed alive?" The elder nodded slowly. "He chanted until the soil closed over him. They say the last sound anyone heard was not a scream, but the echo of a prayer." Tien exhaled shakily. "And the nail?" "It was one of 7, each one forged from the temple's own bells, each one meant to hold his voice in death. But the voice does not die." That night, Tien returned to the temple with the elder's story ringing in his head. He could not stop imagining the monk, bound, mouth bleeding, whispering prayers through iron. The thought lingered as he knelt before the altar again, the nails still wedged in the beam above. His flashlight beam caught something new. On the wall near the reliquary pit, faint writing had appeared, carved shallow as though from inside the stone itself. "They sealed me in faith. They forgot I was mercy." Tien froze. He didn't carve that, and it hadn't been there before. The letter shimmered faintly, pulsing like veins of blood under moonlight. He stepped back, his breath fogging in the cold. Then came a voice, not a sound in the room, but in his head, a voice made of air and rust and distance. "You touched what remembers." Tien's knees weakened. "Who's there?" "Do not call me back." He fled outside, but the fog had thickened, rolling down from the mountain like a slow-breathing tide. It carried shapes within it, robed figures, kneeling forms, all motionless, all facing the temple. He blinked, and they were gone. Only incense smoke remained, yet the smell was wrong. It wasn't sweet or sacred. It was iron, like blood boiled with candle wax. And under the wind, faint but sure, came the sound of chanting again. Low, endless, mourning, a prayer spoken through metal. He stayed awake until dawn. When the light finally touched the temple gates, the nail above the altar gleamed bright red, not painted, not rusted, but wet. And at its base, a single drop of blood clung like a tear. That evening, unable to resist, Tien returned to the reliquary with a trowel and lantern. The elder's words circled his thoughts. 7 nails, 7 betrayals. He had found one. Where were the others? He brushed away the earth near the stone's foundation, following a hairline crack that pulsed faintly in the dark. Beneath it, he found a piece of fabric, deep saffron, monk's cloth, stiff with age. As he lifted it, a whisper of breath escaped from the soil, and for a heartbeat, he smelled something human, sweat, ash, decay. Then a faint shimmer of metal. Another nail, shorter, but carved with the same symbols. He reached for it, but the moment his skin brushed it, the world blurred. He was standing in a burning temple, monks screaming around him. Flames devoured scrolls, statues, and bones. A man in golden robes knelt in the center, his hands bound, a glowing nail pressed against his tongue. "Master, forgive us!" someone shouted. The monk lifted his eyes, sad, calm, infinite. Then the hammer fell. Once, twice. The sound echoed through his skull, and then silence. Tien woke on the temple floor, dirt under his nails, his body trembling. The second nail lay beside him, slick with dew, or perhaps tears. He didn't know. But as dawn rose, one thing became horribly clear. The whispers were no longer only in his dreams. They were beneath his feet, waiting, listening, remembering.
Tien no longer pretended he was imagining it. The temple was remembering, not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally remembering, and it was using him to do it. Each day brought new symbols to the walls, delicate scratches that weren't there the night before. His notes, written in ink, began to alter themselves. Lines curved, words blurred. Some sentences no longer belonged to him. He read one aloud by accident. "The nail is not a weapon, it is a wound." The air shifted. Dust rose from the corners like sighs. The altar candles, even unlit, began to lean toward him as if bowing or warning. He took the second nail, the one from the reliquary, and placed it beside the first, now driven into the prayer beam. They did not hum, but Tien felt them vibrating. Not in his hands, in his skull. He pressed his fingers to his temples and whispered, "What do you want from me?" Silence. Then, a single word rose from the back of his tongue, without his permission. Witness. That night he returned to his dreams, but they were no longer just visions, they were reenactments. He stood once again inside the temple, only now it was whole, unburned, alive. Monks chanted, bells rang in unison, lanterns cast golden halos across saffron robes. At the center of it all, kneeling in radiant stillness, was Tien Bao. His eyes were closed, his face was soft, beautiful in that strange way sorrow can be. His mouth moved in prayer, but no sound emerged. Then the silence broke. From the shadows 7 disciples entered, each carrying something: rope, scripture, ink, nails. One whispered, "Forgive us, Master, the drought won't end." Another, "You were supposed to lead, not suffer." The monk only smiled and opened his mouth. Not to speak, to receive. The nail was placed gently on his tongue. The hammer came down. Tien woke in a cold sweat, his tongue aching as though bruised. He ran to the altar. The nails had shifted positions, not just moved, they had rearranged themselves, crossed over each other, now forming a shape he had seen in his dream. A mouth sealed shut. Beneath it, on the floorboards, lay something new. A third nail, shorter, freshly rusted. Where had it come from? He looked at the wall. The writing had changed again. "The 3 wounds remember, 4 will speak, 7 will open the door." Tien backed away. He didn't know what door they meant, but something in the wood beneath his feet whispered, "It is not a door you open to enter. It is a door you open from the inside." The villagers knew something was happening. They avoided him now. Children no longer played near the steps. One of them had whispered that she saw Tien's shadow walking without him. An old man threw salt across the path behind him. Even the dogs barked when he passed. Tien didn't care. He was no longer trying to save the temple. He was trying to understand it. He searched the village's shrine archives, desperate for scrolls, oral histories, anything about the silent path where Tien Bao or the nail writes. He found nothing official. But hidden behind a rotting screen wall in the back of the archive, he found a scroll wrapped in cloth. It was brittle, smelled of ash and mildew. Its title, "The Lament of the Mute Flame." It told of a ritual lost to time, used by monks who wished to silence not only their speech, but their presence. Those who had seen things too sacred to name. These monks would nail their own thoughts into wood, sealing them like spirits. If ever released, the thoughts would return in full, but not as memory, as manifestation. Tien felt a strange clarity settle into him. The nails were not cursed objects, they were vessels. Each one carried a piece of Tien Bao's silence, the pain, the prayers, the betrayal. He hadn't died when they sealed him. He had scattered, across nails, across time, across witnesses. And Tien was simply the next one. He placed the third nail on the altar beside the others. The moment the three aligned, the ground trembled, not violently, but like a breath caught in a throat. A deep vibration passed through the foundation of the temple. Dust curled upward in perfect spirals. The Buddha statue above the altar cracked, not from age, but from pressure. And through the crack in its chest, a sliver of something red gleamed. Not paint, not blood, rust. Tien stepped back. The wall behind the altar split slightly, revealing a hidden seam he had never noticed before. A door, but sealed shut, covered in prayer scripts nailed at each corner. He leaned closer. The door was made not of wood, but of coffin planks. Suddenly, wind surged through the temple, extinguishing every candle at once. The room turned dark. Tien turned. A figure stood at the edge of the altar steps, motionless. Not robed, not barefoot, but faceless. Just skin stretched where a face should be, except for one detail. A deep groove where the mouth belonged, perfectly vertical, like a wound that never closed. It lifted a hand, and in its palm was a nail, longer than the others, blackened with soot. Tien fell to his knees, not from fear, but weight. The weight of silence, of memory, of rusted prayers. And as the faceless monk approached, Tien whispered what he had never dared speak out loud since arriving. "I'm sorry." The figure placed the nail on the floor before him, then vanished. No scream, no breath, only one final echo in the air. "Remember me not for what I saw, but for how you sealed your eyes." The fourth nail sat on the altar like a sleeping animal. It didn't glow, it didn't hum. It simply existed, dense, silent, and heavy with meaning. Tien didn't know where it had come from. The faceless monk had placed it, yes, but what did that mean? Was it memory? Was it permission? Or was it a warning left unfinished? He placed the fourth nail beside the others. The four formed a shape now, a diamond, and in its center, the altar wood began to crack, just slightly, not in violence, but like skin drying under flame. From the crack rose a scent that made Tien's throat close, incense, but soaked in iron. He staggered back. The Buddha statue above the altar, once cracked only in the chest, now bore a fracture running up its neck. Not a break, a seam, as though the statue had once been open and stitched shut again. Tien knelt, not in worship, but surrender. His mind felt distant, his hands trembled, his tongue hurt again. A soreness at the root, like it was bruised by something that had tried to speak through him. He made tea, but couldn't drink it. When he poured hot water into the kettle, the steam rose in shapes, thin silhouettes of monks kneeling. Their robes clung to them like wet prayer flags. They said nothing, but the sound of nails topping against stone echoed faintly behind their image. When he lit incense, the ash didn't fall. It floated, suspended in air like snow unwilling to land. And then came the scent again, blood and sandalwood. He looked down. His hand, once clean, was now smeared with crimson. But it wasn't his blood. It was thicker, older, the kind that had long stopped belonging to the body it came from. He ran outside. The sky above Betrayal was choked with clouds. The villagers did not look up. They walked slowly, as if under a great weight. Tien passed a group of elders standing around a shrine stone. They stopped speaking when he neared. One of them, a midwife with river-stone eyes, whispered something. The ash knows who was silent. Tien froze. "How do you know about the ash?" She didn't answer, but her lips curled, and she said softly, "Because I was a daughter of one of the 7. Her name was Mai, and her mother had been the youngest of Tien Bao's disciples, not a monk, but a scribe in training. She wasn't there when the others betrayed him, but she helped transcribe the prayer of severance, the scripture used to bind the monk into silence. She lived in guilt. She tried to atone. She kept one of the nails, hid it beneath our family shrine." Tien's heart surged. "Where is it?" Mai's eyes darkened. "Gone. Taken. It left the day you arrived." Tien staggered. "It came to the temple." "Yes," she whispered, "because it remembers where it was meant to return." Tien walked back in a daze. He understood now. The nails weren't being discovered. They were coming home. One by one they were returning to the altar, to him, drawn by blood, by memory, by whatever had taken root inside him. He didn't ask for this, but the past had chosen him, and the dead did not care about consent. He sat in the prayer hall and lit another stick of incense, the last one he had. It flared strangely, as if burning from the inside out. Smoke coiled into spirals, then into the shape of a circle. Tien felt something loosen in his throat, not a breath, but a word. It came unbidden, low, chanted. "Om Namas Jana Sutram Kalam Smaranas." The sound didn't feel like him. It vibrated from his bones, not his lips. And as the last syllable left his mouth, the incense burst into ash, not a slow crumble, but an instant bloom. The ash fell everywhere, and where it touched the floor, red markings appeared. Not paint, not blood, something in between. Tien crawled to one of the marks. A handprint burned into the floor. And inside it, embedded in the center of the palm, was a 5th nail, half sunken, glinting like a relic exhumed. He didn't pick it up. He stared, and he wept, not for himself, but for Tien Bao, for every monk who had bowed in silence, then been buried for the sins of others, for every nail that had held not wood, but memory, memory rusted, trapped, choking on prayers never finished. He asked aloud, "What do you want from me?" No answer came. But from the corner of the room, the old bronze gong trembled. He hadn't touched it. No one had struck it in decades. Yet now the hammer swung, not by wind, by will. And it struck once. A low, thunderous sound, more felt than heard, that echoed into the walls, into his chest, into the ash. And when the echo faded, a single voice whispered behind him, not from a mouth, but from the nail. Only the nailed mouth can sing the last chant. Tien picked up the 5th nail. It burned, not hot, not fire, but like grief concentrated in iron. He placed it beside the others, 5 nails, a star. And the Buddha statue above the altar began to weep, literal droplets leaking from the eyes. Not water, not wax, but incense ash mixed with blood. And in the silence, the altar whispered, "Only 2 more to return. Then we remember all."
The temple bell hadn't rung in 73 years. Its rope had rotted. Its copper heart was cracked, its surface green with age, laced in spiderwebs and prayer dust. But when Tien awoke in the black folds of night, it was the first sound he heard. A bell, low, measured. 3 deliberate chimes. Gong, gong, gong. Then silence. Tien sat up, his breath caught in his throat. The candle had burned down beside him, not all the way, but as if something had pressed it out mid-flicker. Outside, the air was still, but the temple was not. He rose slowly. The floor beneath him groaned, not from weight, but recognition, as if it knew his steps now, welcomed them, counted them. He walked barefoot to the old bell tower at the far end of the monastery grounds. Ivy clung to the wood like dying hands. The rope, once brittle and broken, now hung whole again, fresh and swaying. Tien reached out and touched it. The fiber was cold, damp, but strong, recently tied. He looked up. The bell, cracked and ancient, was glistening, like condensation or sweat. And then, from behind him, a voice spoke. It was a woman, older than time, her back hunched, her hair wound in a white knot, her hands clasped in front of her like folded regrets. "I told them not to seal him," she said softly. Tien turned. "Who are you?" "A bell-keeper's widow," she replied. "My husband rang that bell the night they sealed Tien Bao, 3 times, for judgment, for silence, for mercy." Her eyes locked with his. "He was taken 2 days later, burned from the inside out. They said it was fever. I knew better." Tien swallowed hard. Why did he ring it? Because they asked him to, and because he was afraid not to. She stepped toward the bell and placed her palm against the base. "When they sealed Tien Bao, they promised to never call him again. The bell was bound, the clapper removed. But now," she looked at Tien with sorrow and awe, "you didn't ring it, and yet it answered." When Tien returned to the prayer hall, the 6th nail was already there. He found it on the floor beneath the cracked Buddha, lying in a perfect pool of ash, not placed, spat, as though it had forced its way out of the statue's mouth. He knelt before it. The rust was still wet. He didn't pick it up at first. He just watched it. It breathed, a soft hiss of iron against memory. His hand trembled as he reached for it, not from fear, but reverence. This nail didn't burn like the others. It pulsed, like a second heartbeat. He placed it with the others on the altar. 6 nails, 6 sins. And still, the 7th was silent. That day, Tien fasted. Not by choice, by necessity. Every bite of food turned to ash in his mouth. Every sip of water tasted like old blood. His body had begun rejecting the living. He sat at the threshold of the prayer hall, watching the village beyond the trees. It looked thinner. The roads were quieter. The air was heavier. The trees no longer rustled. He saw no birds, no insects. Even the wind had stopped blowing through the chimes. All sound now came from the temple. At 3:13 a.m., the bell rang again, once. This time, Tien felt it in his teeth. The vibration crawled down his spine, into his stomach, and pooled behind his eyes. He stood. The door to the reliquary was open. He didn't remember opening it. The air inside was dense, like walking through syrup. He descended. The steps were made of old bones, carved, polished, arranged in a spiral. He had never seen this before, never dug this deep. And yet here it was, beneath the temple, a burial tunnel. And at the end, a door, made from ropes stitched together with rusted wire. No handle, only a single symbol sewn in the center, the sealed mouth again. He reached out. Before he could touch it, a voice behind him spoke. "Do not open it yet." It was Mai. She had followed him, her face pale, her lips cracked. "I've seen this place in dreams," she whispered. "My mother used to cry out in her sleep, saying she stitched this door with her own regrets." Tien turned to her. "Do you know what's behind it?" Mai shook her head. "I think it's not a what, it's a when." "A when?" "When the truth comes back, when silence runs out." Tien stared at the robe door. He pressed his hand to the seal and heard a breath from the other side. Not human, but once was. They climbed back out before sunrise. The altar candles had relit themselves. The nails shimmered, not with light, but with recognition. And carved into the altar itself, new words. One more. The mouth, the wound, the return. Tien collapsed. He didn't dream, but somewhere in the darkness behind his eyelids, a bell rang, once, then again, and a final time, each one softer, as though it were ringing from underwater. The seventh nail did not appear at dawn. It did not fall from a statue, rise from ash, or whisper from beneath the floor. It waited. Tien felt it before he saw it, a heaviness in his chest, as though something within him had turned dense, not with pain, but remembrance. He moved slower. He breathed less. His words stuck to the roof of his mouth like forgotten names. By noon, the wind returned, not outside, but inside the temple. A slow stirring of air that moved only through the reliquary, as if beckoning him downward. He followed. This time, he brought nothing. No candle, no notebook, no rope. Just his hands, just his body, and the rust singing faintly beneath his fingernails. The burial tunnel felt longer. Each step echoed, not in space, but in memory. He saw flickers of moments not his own, a young monk sweeping ash from a floor that burned without flame, a hand scrawling scripture across parchment made from skin, 7 men hammering nails into a drum, not a coffin, a prayer drum. Tien stopped breathing. The room at the end of the tunnel was round, smooth, silent. No altar, no offerings. At its center lay the drum, nearly 2 meters wide, bound in thick, dark leather, carved with chants so old they no longer belonged to any tongue spoken in the waking world. Its edges were sealed with nails, dozens, but only one remained untouched by rust. One gleamed like new iron, and it pulsed. Tien knelt. His fingers traced the drum's surface. It was not leather, not hide. It was skin, human, monk's robe fused into flesh.
He placed his ear against the drum. At first, nothing. Then, faintly, a heartbeat. Not steady, but chanted. Each beat a syllable, each silence a vow. And beneath it all, something tried to rise. He knew what he had to do. He lifted the final nail and drove it into the last empty space on the drum. The reaction was instant. The room inhaled, not air, history. Dust flew backward into the corners. The ground pulsed. The tunnel behind him sealed itself with the sound of 1,000 whispers returning home. The nail drove deeper on its own, swallowed by the flesh of the drum. And then the drum shivered. Not violently, not angrily, but like a body remembering the moment it died. Tien collapsed. He was no longer in the burial room. He was standing in a storm of ash. Around him, monks knelt in a circle. Tien Bao stood in the center, mouth sewn, eyes closed, hands outstretched. He turned slowly to face Tien. The stitches on his lips unraveled, one by one. His eyes opened. They were rust-colored. He spoke. His voice was not angry, not holy. It was full of grief. I asked to be forgotten, but you remembered me. Now you must carry what I could not bury. Tien fell to his knees. I didn't mean to open. You didn't. I called you, because you were already broken. The vision faded. Tien was lying at the base of the drum. The 7th nail was gone, not fallen, absorbed, and from the top of the drum a crack had formed, thin, deliberate, a lid. He knew what lay beneath, not a body, not bones, but the voice of the monk himself, still alive in rust, still humming, still sealed. He did not try to open it. He couldn't. It wasn't his to break. But something had changed. The altar above was calling him again. He climbed slowly, weak, light-headed. When he reached the prayer hall, all 7 nails now lay in a perfect circle, not where he placed them, where they wanted to be. And in the center, a single black feather, untouched by wind or bird. He picked it up. It dissolved, and in its place, burned into the wood, were the final words of the day. When the chant begins again, the silence must end, even if it costs you your tongue. Tien wept, not from fear, but from the weight of inheritance. He didn't choose this, but silence had chosen him.
The altar had changed. No longer wood, no longer stone, but something between, something woven from both. The nails rested in a circle, humming like tuning forks pressed to the soul. Tien stood before them, barefoot, trembling. His lips were cracked from fasting. His voice had faded to little more than breath. The silence was not quiet. It was heavy, full, ancient. It pressed into him like unseen hands, as if the temple were trying to fit itself inside his ribs. And then they came, one by one, not walking, not floating, just appearing. Figures formed from smoke, bone, prayer ash, robes that moved without bodies, eyes like old ink stains, blurred from time but refusing to fade. 7 of them, 7 disciples, the ones who had betrayed Tien Bao, the ones who had hammered silence into mercy.
They stood in a semicircle around the altar, facing Tien. No judgment, no emotion, just presence. The first stepped forward. His name was Bao Dui, a tall, stern figure with hands stained red. He bowed low. "I was the one who forged the nails," he said, voice echoing like footsteps in an empty hall. Tien whispered, "Did they?" Bao Dui shook his head. They listened harder, because silence is louder when it is forced. And with that, he vanished into rust. The second approached, Min Hua, the youngest. Her face was wrapped in gauze, her eyes hollow. I held the scripture over his head, the binding words. I told myself it was compassion to preserve his soul before the curse devoured it. But it wasn't compassion. It was fear. Tien asked, "Fear of what?" "Of seeing him suffer, because it made me question my own peace." And she too crumbled into dust, her robes collapsing into nothing. The third was Chan Vin, the disciplinarian. He limped forward with a staff broken in two. "I was the one who led the vote. The night we sealed him, I told the others it was the only way to save the village. I lied. I wanted him gone." "Why?" Tien asked. He bowed his head. "He made me feel small when he said nothing. I couldn't stand his stillness. It revealed mine was empty." And with a sigh, he faded. The fourth was Dao Lin, whose robe still bled at the hem. "I was meant to take his place," she whispered, "but I was not ready. I feared being compared to him, so I signed the decree to remove him." Tien shook his head, tears threatening. "You gave up your truth to silence his." She nodded. "Envy can wear many masks. Mine wore the face of obedience." Ash took her gently. The fifth and sixth came together, twin brothers, Hai Tang and Hai Nam. They chanted in unison. "We carried his body. We buried his voice. We did not ask. We obeyed, because it is easier to follow fear than question devotion." Tien looked at them with sorrow. "You carried the weight of silence." They smiled faintly. "No, we carried the fear of breaking it." And they dissolved into spiraling threads of smoke. Only one remained, the seventh, the tallest, the quietest. He wore no name on his robe, just a single symbol, a sealed mouth burned into the fabric. Tien stepped toward him. "Who are you?" The figure lifted its head, and for the first time, Tien saw his own face. Not a reflection, but a duplicate, a mirror made from memory. The figure spoke without opening its mouth. "I was the witness, the one who saw it all and said nothing, because I believed silence was neutrality. I was wrong." Tien whispered, "You are me." The figure nodded. "I am what you would have been if you had walked away." And with that, the figure stepped back into him. Tien gasped. His heart stuttered. The silence shattered inside him like glass. And then the bell rang. Once, then twice, then a third time. From nowhere, from everywhere. And the temple breathed, deep, sorrowful, full of rust and incense and mourning. The seven had returned, their sins confessed, their names remembered, their silence undone. But one task remained. Release. Tien climbed to the altar. The seventh nail, the one driven into the prayer drum, now lay at the center of the circle. Above it hovered a sliver of light, thin, sharp, singing. It was not a tool. It was not metal. It was a word, unspoken, unwritten, held in rust for too long, and now it wanted to be free. Tien reached for it, and the temple, in all its bones and sorrow and silence, held its breath.
The word hovered above the altar. It was not made of sound, not carved from ink. It pulsed with rust-colored light, trembling softly, not like a voice shouting to be heard, but like a prayer too sacred to speak. Tien reached toward it. It did not resist. It entered him. Not through his mouth, not through his ears. It moved into his chest like breath returning to lungs once thought dead. His ribs ached, his vision blurred. A low hum built beneath his skin, a resonance as though his body had become a chamber for something ancient to echo through. He opened his mouth to scream, but what came out was a chant, not in any language he knew. It vibrated from his throat in syllables shaped by memory, not mind. Kai Tum, Vo Tung, Yap Huet, Nyem Ho. Each word struck the air like a drumbeat against bone. He dropped to his knees. The temple responded. Walls trembled. The altar cracked. Candles burst into flame without wicks. Outside, the bell tolled, not 3 times now, but continuously, as if ringing in rhythm to the chant that had never been finished. Tien was no longer speaking. Something was speaking through him. The spirits of the 7 disciples returned, but now they were whole, eyes weeping, hands open. No longer bound by their guilt, they circled him, not as accusers, but as guardians. And from within the reliquary, the prayer drum began to open, not violently, not with force. It bloomed like a wound that had accepted its healing. The top peeled back. Inside was no corpse, only ash. And from that ash, a voice rose, soft, deep, endless. I forgive you. Tien collapsed. But the chant did not stop. His lips kept moving, his throat raw, his breath ragged, yet still the syllables poured forth like water through a broken jar. Kai Tam, Mo Kao, Pa Ting, Zai Wam. It was not a ritual. It was a release. He felt his fingers contorting, his veins pulsing with heat. Beneath his skin symbols formed, the same sacred seals once etched into the nails. His body became scripture, his breath became offering, and his voice, long silenced by fear, became the final key. Then it stopped. The chant ended mid-syllable. Tien fell forward, hands flat, mouth open, tongue split. Not by blade, but by the sound itself. His voice had left him, not in pain, in peace. The temple fell quiet, not the silence of fear, but the hush of something complete. The 7 nails had dissolved into the altar. The prayer drum was gone. Only ash remained, softly spiraling upward like incense burned on a windless day. Tien sat in the center, lips pressed shut, blood dried on his chin. He could no longer speak, but he didn't need to, because everything that had been locked away now had been heard. That evening, the villagers came, uninvited,
unafraid. They found Tien seated before the Buddha, unmoving. They found the temple floor cracked open, revealing the outline of a circle, 7 points joined by rust, etched like a scar in wood. They asked no questions. They offered no words. They simply knelt, because they could feel it. The sorrow had lifted, but something older had remained. Not a ghost, not a monk, a memory that no longer bled. That evening, as the stars hid behind clouds, a wind moved through the hills, the first in decades. It passed through the bell tower and struck the clapper one last time. Gong. A single, perfect note. And somewhere deep inside the last of the nails, which now lived inside Tien's bones, a hum answered.
Tien did not speak for 7 days, not because he couldn't, because he didn't need to. The silence was no longer emptiness, it was ritual. He moved through the temple like a shadow softened by prayer. His tongue, still raw from the chant that had torn it open, ached only when he thought of using it for things that didn't matter, speech without meaning, sound without spirit. Instead, he listened, and the temple whispered. On the 8th day, the candles began to weep. Not melt, weep. Wax did not drip in white or gold. It ran red, dark, thick, and slow, like old blood remembering the wound it came from. Tien watched in stillness. He did not panic. He did not flee. He understood. This was not horror. This was grief, long delayed, finally released. Each of the temple's 7 candles, the ones that had once lined the perimeter of the altar, now bled onto the wood. Where the blood wax pooled, faces appeared in reflection. Not full, not clear, just glimpses. The old disciples, the widow of the bell ringer, the faceless monk with Tien's features, and someone new, a child, small, barefoot, watching him from the corner of the wax. Tien followed the image. It led him to the north wing, long abandoned. The doors were swollen shut with rot, sealed by disuse and vines. He pressed against them. They opened at his touch, groaning like a confession finally spoken. Inside, the air was dry and cold. Dust covered everything like burial cloth. But on the far wall, hidden beneath a tapestry of forgotten prayers, was a mural. Tien pulled the fabric down slowly and stared. It was a painting, faded but not ruined. 7 monks surrounding a child, not kneeling, not blessing, but watching. The child held a candle, a red one, bleeding down his hands. And above them all, written in near invisible ink, "The child is always the final vessel, because only the innocent can carry what the broken cannot." Tien stepped back. His breath caught. Because the child was him, not literally, not by face, but by presence. The same posture, the same wide, silent eyes, the same candle that he had once found as a boy in his grandmother's shrine, the one that burned without flame, the one he was told to never light. He remembered it now, the memory blooming through the cracks of his mind like smoke beneath a locked door. When he was 10, he had found a red candle in a rusted tin box beneath the family altar. He had lit it out of curiosity, and it had wept. Not wax, but blood. His grandmother had slapped it from his hands, sobbing without words, and buried the candle beneath the garden. Tien had never understood.
until now. The mural began to flake as he watched, not in decay, but in release, as though its duty had been fulfilled. And beneath the peeling paint, he found a single nail embedded into the wall. Short, black, not rusted, charred. Tien touched it, and behind him all 7 candles in the main hall extinguished at once. Darkness fell, but it wasn't empty. It breathed. The nail in his hand grew warm, not with heat, with heartbeat. And he heard it again, the chant, but softer now, inside his chest, inside the nail, each syllable a drop of blood in a long-forgotten offering. Niem, huet, ti, tum. Tien fell to his knees. He placed the nail on the altar, and it did not lie flat. It stood upright, balancing on its head like it had never been meant to sleep. It pointed toward the final space, the mouth of the altar, where the scripture was once spoken, where the lies had been justified, where the silence had begun. He opened his journal, now nearly blank. Pages once filled with his notes had faded. Only one line remained. What bleeds was never dead. What sings was never silent. What returns must be carried. He looked at the candles. They were weeping again, but not blood, not wax. Now they wept ash, and the ash curled upward into symbols in the air, the same ones carved into the nails, the same ones burned into his memory. And then a voice, not heard, not spoken, but understood. When the flame bleeds, the soul is ready. The final nail is not found, it is given. Tien bowed his head, and the mural behind him dissolved completely, revealing not a wall, but a door.
The door in the mural was not built of wood. It was constructed from vows. And now, the vows had broken. Tien stood before it, trembling. His body was thinner now, not from starvation, but from shedding. It felt as though each chant, each nail, each vision had peeled away layers of him that had no use in this place anymore. He had not eaten in 5 days, not because he refused, because his body rejected everything. Even water tasted like metal. Even rice turned to ash on his tongue. The villagers whispered of it behind closed doors. He walks like the monk who ate no rice. They meant Tien Bao, and now they meant him. The phrase had lived in the village for nearly a century, a proverb, a warning, a curse. He walks like the monk who ate no rice. It described someone becoming too holy or too haunted, someone who had crossed the threshold of mortal hunger and fed only on memory. Tien remembered his mother using the phrase once. She'd said it when his uncle refused to speak for 3 days after a funeral. He had fasted beside the coffin and muttered prayers no one could understand. He died a month later. His tongue was black, his bones brittle. He'd eaten nothing but dreams. Now Tien understood, because he too was feeding on something unseen. He sat beside the altar. The 8th nail, now standing upright, still hummed like a tuning fork in silence. It vibrated through the temple, and in its song he heard it again, that familiar voice, not external, not internal, a presence that had never left. Tien Bao, you've carried them well, the monk's voice whispered. Tien bowed his head. They were never mine, he whispered through cracked lips. But you remembered them, Tien Bao replied. And then this.
Do you remember me? Tien looked up. He was alone. But the air thickened. The temperature dropped. And across the temple floor, footsteps began to form, not pressed into the dust, but drawn out of it, as though the ground remembered who had walked here last. 7 steps, then one more, a final echo, heavier than the rest. Tien turned. There stood the monk. Tien Bao, whole, ethereal, clad in saffron robes darkened by ash and ritual blood. His mouth was no longer sewn, but it was closed, tightly, as though speaking now would be a second betrayal. Tien knelt. He could not look away. The monk moved forward, and as he walked, the candles relit one by one, not with flame, but with light that felt like forgiveness. Tien Bao raised one hand, opened it. Inside his palm was the final nail. It wasn't rusted, it wasn't sharp, it was smooth, made of bone, carved with infinity of care. Tien stared at it, not daring to move. Then the monk spoke, not with voice, but with gaze. You must carry it, but not as a wound. You must use it, but not to seal. You must wear it in silence. Tien reached forward. The nail passed into his fingers without touch, and as it did, every candle went out, except one, the red candle from his childhood, burning now at the center of the altar, still weeping, not wax, not blood, but words. Each droplet formed a single glyph as it hit the wood. They arranged themselves into a sentence. He who walks without hunger will feed the silence its final song. Tien placed the 9th nail on the altar, but it did not lie with the others. It sank into the altar itself, and from its place a single flower bloomed, lotus-shaped, made of ash, delicate, silent. He touched it, and in that moment his hunger vanished, not because he was full, because he no longer belonged to the realm of the hungry. That night the villagers left bowls of rice at the temple gate. None were touched. By morning the bowls were filled with petals, soft, pale, smelling faintly of burnt incense and iron. The villagers whispered again, "He walks like the monk who ate no rice." But this time he walks toward something. Tien stood beneath the bell tower at dusk. He looked to the sky. It did not hold stars that night. Only smoke. Only silence. And he smiled, because he finally understood what it meant, not to hunger, but to be full of memory. The temple no longer needed doors. It had opened in every direction, inward, outward, downward, and now upward. And the mountain too had begun to stir. Tien woke before the sun. No dream had pulled him from sleep. No voice whispered in his ear. Only the sound of wind brushing through trees. A natural sound, yes, but one that had not returned to Bantru in decades. The air was lighter, but the earth felt heavier, as if it had remembered something buried deep in its spine. Tien packed nothing. He did not dress like a monk, though he moved like one, barefoot, steady. His only companion was the silence, not empty, but sacred. It walked beside him like an old friend. He left the temple and climbed. The mountain trail was nearly gone, eaten by moss, by time, by forgetfulness. But his feet knew the way, the same way his blood had remembered the chant, the same way the nails had remembered where to return. He passed shrines in ruin, pagodas now collapsed into root and stone. He did not mourn them. They were not forgotten. They were sleeping. And today, they were beginning to wake. At the ridge near the summit, where the winds once carried bell chimes from village to village, he found the old stone altar. A circle of carved rock surrounded by offerings so ancient they had fossilized. Rice turned to amber, joss sticks now brittle bones of incense. And at the center, a single stone with a groove in the middle. Tien knelt. He ran his fingers along the groove. Not a crack, a scar. He knew what it was. The heart of the mountain, once a wound, now a seal. And buried beneath it, the first voice, the origin of the chant, the first monk who had swallowed words for the sake of peace, the one who had trained Tien, the one no one had ever named, only referred to as the voice that hid. Tien bowed, then pressed his hand into the groove. At first, nothing. Then the earth shifted, not violently. It breathed. The stone altar began to vibrate, softly like a rib cage remembering how to rise. And beneath it, a faint ring, not metal, bone. Tien stepped back. The ground cracked open, and from within the scar, a shape rose, not pushed, not summoned, simply returned. A coffin, but not made of wood, made of old prayer tablets bound in rusted thread. Its lid slid away on its own. Inside was not a corpse, not even dust, only a skull, and embedded in its forehead, like a final thought preserved in ritual, was a nail. The oldest of them all, the first, the silence before the chant, the thought before the word. Tien bowed, then pressed his forehead to the coffin, and the mountain wept. Clouds rolled over the ridge. Rain did not fall, but the stones grew wet, as if the sky itself had remembered to mourn. Tien lifted the nail. It was light. And the moment his fingers closed around it, the forest hushed. The birds silenced. The wind paused. And somewhere far below, in the temple he had rebuilt with his grief and his blood, the altar split open. He returned at dusk. The climb down had felt like walking through time in reverse. Every step echoed the footsteps of monks long gone. Every branch he passed seemed to lower, bowing in respect. By the time he reached the base of the temple, the doors had opened wide, and in the center of the prayer hall, the altar now revealed its true shape. No longer square, no longer flat, but a mouth, carved open, waiting for the final nail. The first nail. The one that would end the chant by returning it to silence. Tien stepped forward. He raised the nail. The spirits gathered again, the disciples, the child, the faceless monk, the bell ringer's widow, and even the 7 bowls of rice left by the villagers, now filled with white lotus petals. They watched without sound, and he understood without question. This nail was not to seal a curse. It was to close the circle. He pressed it into the altar's mouth, and for a moment, just a heartbeat, the entire temple sang. Not in melody, not in words, but in memory. Then silence. True, whole, sacred. And the candle in the center of the hall went out. No smoke, no flame, just peace. And as the moon rose, its light fell gently on the altar's surface. Where the nails once lay, where the chant once echoed, there now bloomed a single red flower, pulsing softly in the dark. The temple slept, but sleep is not always peace. That night, Tien dreamed of silence again, but not the sacred kind, not the silence that soothes or calms. This was the silence of binding, of something held too long, of a mouth sewn shut, not out of reverence, but punishment. He stood in a room made of breath, walls rising and falling like lungs exhaling forgotten prayers. At the center, kneeling on salt-stained stone, was a monk. His robe was soaked in blood, not fresh, not dripping, just endless, as if it had soaked into him a lifetime of penance stitched into cloth. He had no mouth, not even skin where one had been, just smooth, expressionless flesh stretched across the lower half of his face like sealed wax. But he wept, from the eyes, from the ears, from the pores, and the tears were rust-colored. Tien approached slowly. The monk lifted his hand and pointed, not at Tien, at the sky. Above them, etched into the firmament like scripture burned into parchment, were thousands of nails floating, glinting, trembling. And from each a single word dripped downward, words that had never been spoken, that died in the throats of those too afraid, too betrayed, too broken to speak. Words like mercy, forgive, I was wrong, come home, I'm still here. Tien fell to his knees. He understood. The curse of the mouthless monk was not silence. It was the inability to be heard. He awoke screaming, but no sound came out. Just blood, a thin thread of red trailing from his lips to his chest. He staggered to the altar. The red flower had withered. In its place now lay a folded scrap of parchment, coarse, ancient, curled at the edges. He unfolded it. There was no ink, but the page was soaked through in the shape of a face. No mouth, just eyes. And from the eyes, 2 nails had been pressed into the page. Tien touched one. It dissolved. The second embedded itself into his palm. He didn't cry out. He couldn't. The pain was beyond the body now. It was a memory, one older than language, deeper than death. He dropped to his knees, and on the floor before him, the shadow of the monk appeared. Just the outline, arms out, head lowered, waiting. Tien whispered, even though he had no voice, "What do you want me to carry?" And in the air, traced by invisible hands, a single phrase appeared. Those who could not speak now speak through you." He rose, the nail still in his palm, not piercing, just resting, but it burned with purpose. He walked to the back of the temple, to the small meditation chamber behind the reliquary. He hadn't entered this space since his arrival. The floor was covered in black sand. No windows, only a small cracked bell hanging from the ceiling. He sat, crossed his legs, and placed the nail before him. It stood on its own, point up, humming. His lips moved, but no sound emerged. Still, the air shivered. The nail glowed faintly. Tien's breath deepened. His body no longer needed food, no longer craved speech, only release. The walls of the chamber flickered, then disappeared. He was no longer inside the temple. He was in a field of kneeling monks, thousands of them, each with no mouth, each holding a nail, each looking at him. And from them rose the sound of wind, not natural wind, but memory exhaling. Tien raised his hands, pressed them to his chest, and bowed, not in worship, in acknowledgement. They had waited long enough. It was time. When he opened his eyes, he was back in the chamber. The nail had melted into the sand, and where it disappeared, a single word had been burned into the floor. Listen. He bowed to it, and for the first time in his life, he did. He listened to everything. The wind outside, the trees breathing, the footsteps of ancestors, the rust in his blood, the nail beneath his skin, and the mouthless monk behind him, finally at peace.
The rain came softly that night. No thunder, no storm. Only a steady fall, like the sky breathing out centuries of withheld sorrow. And the temple received it, not as punishment, but as a blessing. Tien sat beneath the prayer archway, his robes damp with mist, his hands folded in silence. He had not spoken in 13 days, and now there was nothing left to say. The final nail had melted into him. The final voice had returned to the wind. There was only one task left, and it was not a chant, not a rite. It was a gesture, one last act of surrender. At sunrise, he stepped barefoot into the courtyard. The altar had shifted again, its wood now smooth, blank, as if it had never borne the nails at all, as if the story had unspooled, told itself, and finally returned to rest. Only a single crack remained in the center of the altar, shaped like a mouth once forced closed. Tien placed his hand upon it. It did not open. It simply accepted. And the silence that followed was not empty. It was whole. The villagers arrived before noon. They did not speak. They did not weep. They brought no incense, no offerings, only presents. Each of them, old and young, bowed before the altar and sat in a ring around it. Even Mai came, her hands wrapped in prayer thread, her eyes full of knowing. Tien joined them. He sat cross-legged at the altar's edge, and slowly, they all began to breathe as one. No chant, no sound, just breath. And in that breath,
The rusted silence returned, but it was different now. Not the silence of fear or sin or betrayal. This was ancestral silence, the kind that holds a story long enough to let it bloom again in the mouths of the brave. Tien bowed. So did they all. And in that bow, a wind swept through the temple, the first true wind in decades. It touched every stone, every nail mark, every corner of the reliquary. And it whispered, "We are still here." Tien rose and walked alone to the bell tower. He did not pull the rope. He only stood beneath it. The bell, weathered and green with time, swayed slightly in the breeze. And for a brief, sacred moment, it rang, a soft chime, not loud, not calling for prayer, just a note, a memory, a reminder that not all things broken must be mended. Some must simply be witnessed. Tien returned to the altar one last time, placed his journal beside it. Its pages now blank, every word, every diagram, every sketch gone. But that was as it should be. The story had never belonged to paper. It had lived in the rusted silence between generations. And now it lived in breath, in wind, in silence that would one day bloom again. As dusk approached, the sky burned orange. Tien sat beneath the Bodhi tree behind the temple, watching light fade across the stone. And from deep within the earth, no louder than a falling leaf, he felt it. A final whisper, a final word. "Thank you." And the temple exhaled. The next morning, the villagers returned. Tien was gone, but in his place, atop the altar, lay one final object. Not a nail, not a scroll, just a small red candle, still warm, still weeping. And beside it, etched into the altar's edge, a single sentence. "If you must speak, speak only what the silence cannot hold." And so the legend passed, not with ceremony, not with mourning, but in soft retellings beside fires, in lullabies sung over sleeping children, in the silence before each prayer, of the man who carried the nails, of the monk who was never buried, of the rust that remembered, and of the silence that in the end did not break, but forgave.